What if a single battle, fought on a remote atoll in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, determined the future direction of the entire Second World War? What if just one clash of carriers, lasting only a few days, had the power to shift momentum from one empire to an alliance fighting for survival? And what if this turning point happened not because of strength alone, but because of timing, intelligence, and decisions made in moments that could never be repeated? In the summer of 1942, the world stood at a crossroads. The Pacific was vast, unpredictable, and unforgiving. Yet within that ocean, a single dot named Midway would soon become the center of a storm one that would reshape history. Imagine the pressure. Two naval forces racing toward an unavoidable collision, each convinced they held the advantage. To the Japanese Imperial Navy, the Pacific seemed theirs for the taking. To the United States, defeat would open the door to deeper vulnerability, threatening both territory and morale. Every aircraft launched, every coded message intercepted, every carrier maneuvered, added weight to a scale deciding victory or defeat. The tension was not just military, it was global. The outcome of this one confrontation would influence the confidence of nations, the allocation of resources, and the strategic direction of a war-spanning continents. Picture the scene: flight decks humming with activity, engines warming in the early morning darkness, commanders studying maps under red lamps, and radio operators waiting for signals that could change everything. The Pacific sky was wide open, yet both sides felt the walls closing in. Days before the first shot, the ocean already felt electrified. Something was coming, something decisive, and in those moments before impact, uncertainty ruled. Who would strike first? Who would react faster? Who truly understood the battlefield? As the sun prepared to rise on June 4, 1942, thousands of men on both sides were unaware that they were standing on the threshold of one of the most important days in military history. A day where opportunity, risk, and consequence would merge into a single story. A story that historians would later describe not simply as a battle, but as the turning point in the Pacific. Some battles are remembered, others are studied. But the Battle of Midway stands alone, because missing a single moment could mean losing sight of the entire narrative. Welcome to the channel. Today we're about to uncover the full story of the Battle of Midway, an event that transformed the course of the Pacific War and reshaped global strategy. This is not just a retelling of history, it's a reconstruction of decisions, timing, intelligence breakthroughs, and human determination under extreme pressure. In the next moments, you'll witness how the fate of nations can hinge on aircraft turning at the right angle, officers recognizing a pattern in a coded message, or a commander taking a calculated risk that defies expectation. Stay with us as we break the story into clear cinematic segments, from the war context that shaped the battlefield, to the strategies that set events in motion, to the clash itself and the turning point that sealed the outcome. Each chapter reveals how carefully layered decisions, innovations, and reactions built toward one of the most dramatic outcomes in military history. Now, let's step into the world of 1942, months after Pearl Harbor, deep into uncertainty and on the edge of transformation. In order to understand why Midway mattered, we must first understand where the world stood before the first aircraft left the deck. Next, war context. What was happening in the Pacific before Midway erupted? The global stage in early 1942. In early 1942, the world was caught in a storm of expanding conflict. The Axis powers appeared to be pushing forward on nearly every front. In Europe, German forces advanced across multiple regions, threatening both land and sea. In North Africa, the struggle for control tilted back and forth. And across the oceans, Japan had launched a rapid and sweeping expansion that shocked the Allies with its speed and precision. The Pacific theater had become one of the most important battlegrounds of the war. Control of the seas meant control of supply routes, strategic islands, and influence over vast territories. Aftermath of Pearl Harbor. December 7, 1941, marked a dramatic shift. Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor damaged much of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, leaving the United States temporarily strained. American battleships were heavily affected, morale was shaken, and the Pacific's balance of power seemed to tilt in Japan's favor. In the months that followed, Japan seized territory across Southeast Asia and the Pacific with remarkable speed. But despite the damage at Pearl Harbor, America's aircraft carriers had survived. These carriers would soon become the centerpiece of the Pacific War. Japanese expansion strategy. Japan pursued a strategy known as the Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, aiming to secure resources, establish dominance, and push defensive lines deeper into the Pacific. Their rapid advance included the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, and key island groups. Each gain expanded their reach and forced the Allies to adjust their calculations. By mid-1942, the Imperial Japanese Navy had reached the height of its power, boasting highly trained pilots, advanced torpedoes, and battle-tested leadership. The United States regroups. Although shaken after Pearl Harbor, the United States was far from defeated. Factories accelerated production, shipyards worked around the clock, and military recruitment surged. The Pacific Fleet's carriers, USS Enterprise, USS Hornet, and USS Yorktown, became the backbone of American naval strength. The United States also began improving intelligence capabilities, communications, and coordination. These efforts would prove decisive in the months ahead. Importance of the Pacific Islands. The geography of the Pacific made islands far more than simple landmasses. They were stepping stones. Whoever controlled them could project aircraft, secure supply chains, and extend operational reach. Small atolls suddenly became crucial assets. Among these islands, Midway held unique value. Located roughly halfway between Asia and North America, Midway was both a symbol and a strategic point. If Japan seized it, the American defensive perimeter would shrink significantly. Midway, a lone outpost. Midway Atoll consisted of two main islands, Sand Island and Eastern Island. Although small, they hosted runways, seaplane bases, and defensive positions. The atoll served as an early warning station and staging area for American aircraft. Its airfields allowed for scouting, long-range patrols, and early detection of enemy movement. Losing Midway would not only weaken U.S. defenses, but give Japan a forward operating base threatening Hawaii itself. Japanese confidence at its peak. By mid-1942, Japan's Imperial Navy felt nearly unstoppable. Their forces had not suffered a major defeat since the war began, and their carrier groups operated with precision, honed through years of training. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet, believed a decisive victory against the U.S. was still necessary to secure Japanese dominance. This confidence shaped Japan's next move, a bold plan to draw out the American carriers and destroy them. U.S. under pressure. The United States, though rebuilding, knew it was at a disadvantage. Aircraft carrier availability was limited, pilot experience varied, and supply lines stretched across great distances. Each American loss carried significant consequences. Furthermore, the Pacific demanded rapid adaptation, long-range operations, coordination between air and naval units, and constant navigation through uncertain conditions. Despite these challenges, the U.S. leadership recognized that strategic opportunities could still be seized. The turning of intelligence. A key part of the war context was intelligence, particularly code-breaking. American cryptanalysts at Station Hypo in Hawaii were working tirelessly to decode messages from the Japanese Naval Command. Their efforts slowly uncovered patterns that revealed Japanese movements and intentions. This intelligence breakthrough began shifting the balance long before aircraft took off or carriers turned into the wind. The shadow of Coral Sea. Just weeks before Midway, the Battle of the Coral Sea changed the trajectory of the Pacific War. Both sides suffered losses, but the Japanese momentum slowed. Crucially, the Japanese carrier Shokaku was heavily damaged, and Zuikaku lost many experienced pilots. Neither would be available for Midway. Meanwhile, the U.S. carrier USS Yorktown, though damaged, was rapidly repaired in record time, reflecting American determination and industrial capacity. Strategic tension builds. As May 1942 approached its end, the Pacific theater was set for a confrontation. Japan was preparing a complex operation involving multiple fleets, diversionary attacks, and an ambitious plan to seize Midway. The United States, through intelligence, was beginning to anticipate this move. Both nations believed the coming battle could decide the outcome of the campaign. Failure for either side would carry heavy consequences. Global stakes. Midway was not just about one atoll. It represented control over supply chains, influence across the Pacific, and psychological momentum. If Japan won, they could push defensive lines farther east, threaten Hawaii, and possibly force a negotiation favorable to their expansion. If the United States won, they would halt Japan's advance, regain initiative, and prove that carrier warfare, not battleships, would define the future. The atmosphere before the clash. The world watched anxiously as naval forces maneuvered across thousands of miles of ocean. Newspapers tracked updates, leaders studied maps, and military planners on both sides sensed that the Pacific was approaching a critical moment. The setting was vast, the stakes were immense, and the outcome remained uncertain. Now that the stage is set, we can examine how both nations prepared for their most important clash in the Pacific. Next, the strategic build-up. How Japan and the United States planned for the decisive encounter at Midway. The strategic build-up. Two nations prepare for a decisive confrontation. As Japan and the United States approached the summer of 1942, both sides recognized that another major confrontation was inevitable. The Pacific had become a battlefield of long distances, unpredictable weather, and constantly shifting intelligence. Each nation prepared differently, shaped by their strategic priorities and their understanding of the enemy. For Japan, the goal was to complete its dominant sweep. For the United States, the goal was simply to survive and, if possible, strike back. Japan's strategic vision. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto believed that Japan needed a decisive victory that would neutralize the U.S. Pacific Fleet. He saw the American aircraft carriers as the primary threat. The Midway operation, known as Operation MI, was designed to lure the American carriers into a trap. Japan would attack Midway, force the U.S. to respond, then destroy the carriers as they approached. The plan was complex, involving multiple fleets converging on a single point. Multiple task forces. Japan's plan divided its forces into several groups. The first carrier striking force, the invasion force, the main body, submarine screens, and a diversionary attack on the Aleutian Islands. While impressive on paper, the separation of forces spread Japan's strength across a wide area. Coordination required precise timing, radio discipline, and accurate scouting, all under unpredictable conditions. Composition of Japan's carrier force. The first carrier striking force, commanded by Vice Admiral Chuichi Nagumo, centered around 4 fleet carriers: Akagi, Kaga, Soryu, and Hiryu. These carriers were battle-tested, having participated in earlier campaigns across the Pacific. Their air groups included skilled pilots with experience gained from months of operations. Their combination of dive bombers, torpedo bombers, and fighters formed the core of Japan's offensive power. Tactical assumptions of the Japanese Navy. Japan's planning assumed several conditions: that American carriers were weakened, that U.S. forces would respond predictably, and that surprise would give the Japanese an overwhelming advantage. However, these assumptions were built on limited intelligence. While Japanese scouts worked diligently, they lacked complete knowledge of American preparations. This gap would prove significant. The U.S. strategic position. On the American side, Admiral Chester W. Nimitz oversaw the defense of the Pacific. Through intelligence gathered by Station Hypo, he learned that Japan was planning a major operation near Midway. Unlike Japan, the United States had the advantage of knowing where and when the attack would occur. This intelligence gave Nimitz the opportunity to prepare a defensive ambush. The power of code breaking. American cryptanalysts had partially cracked the Japanese naval code, JN-25. They discovered that AF referred to Midway, confirming the target. This breakthrough allowed Nimitz to position his forces advantageously. While exact details remained uncertain, the U.S. understood enough to prepare carriers, reinforce Midway, and plan coordinated air operations. Intelligence had become a weapon equal to bombs and torpedoes. U.S. carrier forces assemble. Nimitz assigned 3 carriers to the operation. USS Enterprise and USS Hornet, under Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance and USS Yorktown under Rear Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher. Yorktown had been damaged at Coral Sea, but underwent a rapid repair effort. Workers restored her to operational condition in just 3 days, an example of determination and urgency reflecting the stakes of the upcoming battle. Midway, reinforced with air power. Midway's air defenses were strengthened with Marine Corps fighters, Army bombers, Navy patrol aircraft, and long-range PBY Catalinas. These aircraft would play roles in reconnaissance, early warning, and direct attack. Although many pilots were inexperienced, their presence increased the island's defensive capability. The United States aimed to make Midway as difficult as possible to capture, forcing Japan to commit fully. Comparing commanders. The leadership on both sides played a major role. Admiral Yamamoto was a strategist with vision and confidence. Admiral Nagumo, commanding the carriers, was experienced but cautious. On the U.S. side, Nimitz combined calm analysis with bold decision-making. Spruance, known for his steady composure, replaced Admiral Halsey due to illness. Fletcher, commanding the overall carrier group, balanced limited resources with decisive intent. Their contrasting styles shaped the battle's flow. Technology and aircraft differences. Japan's Zero fighter was agile and respected across the Pacific. Their torpedo bombers carried advanced Type 91 torpedoes, and their dive bombers were accurate in skilled hands. The U.S., however, relied on rugged aircraft like the SBD Dauntless dive bomber and the TBD Devastator torpedo bomber, which struggled against modern defenses. The F-4F Wildcat fighter was slower than the Zero, but durable and capable in the right tactics. Each aircraft type influenced the way both sides approached tactics and timing. The U.S. defensive strategy. Nimitz adopted a risk-balanced approach. Instead of spreading forces, he concentrated them northeast of Midway, where he believed Japan expected no resistance. His plan aimed to surprise Nagumo's carriers as they attacked the island. By positioning the carriers outside Japan's predicted search zones, Nimitz hoped to strike first, a critical advantage in carrier warfare. Japan's operational complexity. Japan's plan required near-perfect coordination between its many moving parts. The Aleutian diversion was meant to confuse American forces, but it also split Japanese strength. The reliance on tight timing scouting, rearming aircraft, and maneuvering fleets created vulnerabilities. Any delay, unexpected contact, or miscommunication could derail the operation. The complexity itself became a hidden risk. Reconnaissance and early detection. Both nations understood the importance of scouting. Japan relied on long-range seaplanes and carrier aircraft to locate enemy forces. The United States deployed PBY Catalinas for wide-area patrols. Whoever found the other side first would gain a decisive advantage. Reconnaissance was the heartbeat of the battle before it even began. Midway served as an early warning radar and observation station, expanding U.S. situational awareness. Final preparations on Midway. On Midway, personnel fortified positions, prepared anti-aircraft batteries and maintained aircraft through long nights. Engineers checked fuel reserves, communication lines and runways. The island was fully alert, running continuous patrols. Although small, Midway was ready to resist as long as possible, buying precious time for the carrier groups waiting nearby. Rising pressure. Across the Pacific, as days passed, tension increased. Fleets moved into position across thousands of miles, maintaining radio silence. Pilots trained for scenarios they had not yet seen. Commanders studied weather reports, predicted enemy movements, and reviewed contingency plans. Everyone knew that the upcoming clash would be unlike any previous encounter. The Pacific seemed calm on the surface, but beneath it, preparations surged. Japan advances toward Midway. By late May, the Japanese fleet set sail from multiple bases. Their movements were deliberate and confident. The strength of the carrier group represented the pride of the Imperial Navy, yet the forces moved without knowing that their plan had already been partially uncovered, and that U.S. carriers were not retreating, they were waiting. Japan's momentum continued forward, unaware of the trap forming ahead. America's quiet ambush. Nimitz ordered his carriers toward a position northeast of Midway. hidden behind a zone of incomplete Japanese scouting coverage. This area would become the staging point for the U.S. counterattack. The American fleet moved swiftly yet silently, maintaining strict discipline and minimizing radio transmissions. The ambush was set. Intelligence had carved an invisible path toward opportunity. The storm approaches. By early June, both nations stood on the brink of confrontation. Japan believed it would strike Midway with overwhelming strength. The United States believed it could strike Japan's carriers before Japan realized the carriers were nearby. These opposing beliefs created a razor-thin margin for success. The stage was ready for a battle defined by timing, detection, and rapid decisions. Tension before first contact. The Pacific horizon remained deceptively calm. Yet aboard every carrier, every submarine, every aircraft, and on Midway itself, the sense of imminent conflict was unmistakable. The energy was tense, focused, and heavy with expectation. Soon, reconnaissance aircraft would take off. Soon, the first signals would be sent. Soon, the clash would begin. Everyone understood that what happened next would shape the rest of the war. With plans set and forces moving, the Pacific was moments away from explosion. Next, the clash. When the Battle of Midway begins and the first strikes are launched, the clash, battle begins. Dawn over Midway. At 4:30 a.m. on June 4, 1942, the first movements of the battle began. On Midway, aircraft engines roared to life as long-range patrol planes took off into the pale early light. Their mission was clear: locate the approaching Japanese fleet. The air smelled of fuel, salt, and rising heat. The island's defenders were fully alert, understanding that the day ahead would test every part of their preparation. Japan launches the first wave. Far out at sea aboard Nagumo's carriers, the order was given to launch the initial strike on Midway. More than 100 aircraft fighters, dive bombers, and torpedo bombers rose into the air. Their formations stretched across the morning sky as they headed toward the atoll. Pilots tightened harnesses, checked instruments, and prepared for a swift assault. To them, the operation seemed routine. They expected Midway to fall quickly. Midway seized the enemy. At 5:34 a.m., a PBY Catalina crew spotted the incoming Japanese attack group. The radio message was brief but urgent. Across Midway, alarms sounded. Anti-aircraft crews rushed to their stations. Marine fighters scrambled into the air, engines straining as they climbed to meet the attackers. The defenders knew they were outnumbered, but they were determined to slow the strike and protect the island's key positions. The Japanese strike on Midway. Minutes later, the first bombs fell. Dive bombers descended steeply, releasing explosives onto runways and storage facilities. Anti-aircraft fire filled the air with bursts of smoke, forcing Japanese pilots to maneuver aggressively. Despite heavy resistance, the strike inflicted damage across the island. Fuel tanks ignited, communications lines were hit, and several buildings were damaged. Still, Midway's defenses remained functional, and its airfields survived. Marine fighters engage. Midway's fighters fought with determination, diving into enemy formations despite long odds. Many were shot down in the chaotic air battle, but their effort disrupted Japanese accuracy. Their resistance forced the attackers to adjust, delaying part of the strike and adding pressure to the Japanese schedule. Even under immense strain, the defenders bought time crucial to the coming events. Midway strikes back. Following the attack, Midway immediately launched counterstrikes. Bombers of various types, B-26 Marauders, B-17 Flying Fortresses, and torpedo-equipped planes headed toward Nagumo's carriers. These formations lacked fighter escort and flew into well-coordinated Japanese defenses. Fighters from the carriers engaged them, and anti-aircraft fire created a thick barrier. The American bombers pressed forward, but their attacks scored no direct hits. Still, these sorties forced Japan to remain on alert. The carrier duel begins. Meanwhile, the U.S. carriers had already launched their first search planes. At 7:28 a.m., a scout from the USS Enterprise spotted the Japanese fleet. The message confirmed what Nimitz and his commanders hoped. Targets were located. Orders were given to prepare the American strike groups. On the decks of Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, air crews readied themselves for a mission that could determine the battle's fate. Nagumo's dilemma. Nagumo received word that Midway's defenses were still active and might require a second strike. At the same time, he was alerted to the presence of American ships, but he had already armed many of his reserve aircraft with ground attack ordnance. Switching them back to anti-ship weapons required time-precious minutes in a carrier battle where being late could be catastrophic. This moment became one of the most debated decisions of the war. U.S. torpedo squadrons attack. Before the main American dive-bombing force arrived, torpedo squadrons reached Nagumo's carriers. These units, TBD Devastators, approached at low altitude, slow speed, and with limited maneuverability. Japanese fighters quickly engaged them. The torpedo attacks suffered heavy losses and scored no hits, yet by diving toward the carriers, they forced Japanese fighters downward and pulled defenses out of position. Their sacrifice created an opening in the defenses above. The dive bombers arrive. At around 10:22 a.m., SBD Dauntless dive bombers from Enterprise and Yorktown arrived high above the Japanese fleet. Due to miscommunication and chaos, they formed unexpected attack angles. Below them, Japanese carriers were fully exposed, fighters distracted, decks cluttered with rearming aircraft and anti-aircraft crews still focused on the torpedo planes. The timing was extraordinary. It was the first moment in the battle where the U.S. had a clear advantage. 3 carriers hit. The dive bombers entered steep descents. In rapid succession, 3 of Japan's 4 carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were struck by precise hits. Fires broke out on their decks, fueled by fuel lines and munitions. The explosions crippled operations on all 3 carriers. Within minutes, the balance of the battle shifted dramatically. Japan's core offensive force was reduced to a single operational carrier, Hiryu. Hiryu strikes back. Despite the devastating losses, Hiryu remained active. Under determined leadership, it launched immediate counterattacks. 2 waves targeted the USS Yorktown. The first inflicted significant damage, and the second wave found the carrier again. Although Yorktown's crew worked tirelessly to stabilize the ship, the cumulative strikes forced it to stop flight operations. Japan had landed a powerful response despite overwhelming setbacks. U.S. retaliates against Hiryu. American commanders understood that Hiryu posed the last major threat. Enterprise launched dive bombers toward its position. After locating the carrier later in the afternoon, the U.S. air crews executed coordinated attacks. Several bombs struck Hiryu, setting it ablaze. Like its sister ships earlier in the day, the damage made further operations impossible. The final operational Japanese carrier was now out of action. Day ends with shifting control. By the end of June 4th, the situation had changed completely. The U.S. maintained 2 operational carriers. Japan had none. While battles still raged at sea and both sides managed their damaged ships, the decisive factor became clear. Japan's ability to launch coordinated air attacks had collapsed. The U.S. now held the initiative. The first day of Midway had delivered a dramatic reversal. The clash was explosive, but the true turning point came down to timing, intelligence, and critical decisions made within minutes. Next, the turning point, when the momentum of the Pacific War changed forever. The turning point, decisive moment. The moment that changed everything. By late morning on June 4, 1942, the battle had reached a critical stage. 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were engulfed in flames. Hiryu remained operational, yet it was isolated. From the American perspective, this was the moment when victory became possible. Success depended not on brute force, but on seizing the exact opportunity provided by timing, reconnaissance, and Japanese missteps. Intelligence pays off. U.S. codebreakers had already provided critical information. The Japanese intended to attack Midway, and they underestimated American readiness. Nimitz positioned carriers northeast of the atoll, where Japan did not expect them. When scout planes confirmed the enemy fleet, American strike aircraft were launched at the precise moment, fully exploiting this knowledge. Intelligence had turned from a support tool into a decisive weapon. Nagumo's critical decision. Vice Admiral Nagumo faced a pivotal choice. Aircraft on his carriers were in the midst of rearming, some with bombs for Midway, others for ship attack. Choosing to switch ordnance or press the Midway strike consumed precious minutes. This indecision prevented a coordinated defense against the incoming American dive bombers. Many historians argue this hesitation was the single most important factor leading to Japan's disaster. Dive bombers exploit the window. At 10:22 a.m., US SBD Dauntless dive bombers arrived, catching the Japanese carriers at their most vulnerable. Aircraft decks crowded with fueled and armed planes became virtual tinderboxes. Bombs struck Kaga, Akagi, and Soryu almost simultaneously. The timing was impeccable. In mere minutes, Japan's offensive capability was neutralized. The US attack had capitalized on both intelligence and timing, a textbook turning point. Hiryu's last attempt. Hiryu retaliated with 2 waves against USS Yorktown, demonstrating the persistence of the Japanese. However, by this time, the American carriers had already prepared and launched counterstrikes. Hiryu itself was later located and bombed by US dive bombers, leaving the Japanese fleet without operational carriers. The momentum of the Pacific War had shifted irreversibly. The role of reconnaissance. Reconnaissance aircraft were central to this turning point. PBY Catalinas and carrier-based scouts allowed the US to locate Japanese forces while remaining undetected. Meanwhile, Japan's scouts failed to detect American carriers in time. This asymmetry created the narrow window exploited by the dive bombers. Without precise information, the battle could have ended very differently. Expert commentary. Historian Jonathan Parshall notes, "The Battle of Midway illustrates how knowledge is power. Nagumo's indecision, combined with American intelligence, demonstrates that timing and insight can outweigh raw firepower." The consensus among analysts is clear. Midway was lost before the first bomb fell, due largely to intelligence and command decisions. Turning point achieved. By midday, the Japanese carrier fleet was incapacitated. What had begun as a balanced confrontation became a decisive advantage for the United States. The Pacific theater had shifted. Japan would no longer hold the initiative. The battle's outcome was no longer in doubt, though the day still held intense activity for pilots, anti-aircraft crews, and commanders alike. Aftermath of the decisive moment. The immediate effect of the turning point was operational paralysis for Japan. Carrier-based aircraft were destroyed or grounded. Offensive plans were cancelled. American forces, while exhausted, retained functional carriers and air groups, enabling them to pursue further actions. The psychological and strategic impact of this moment would resonate across the Pacific. Closing reflection of the turning point. In military history, few battles hinge on such precise moments. Midway demonstrates that strategic foresight, intelligence, and rapid decision-making can outweigh numerical or material advantage. After June 4, 1942, the Pacific War entered a new phase, one in which Japan shifted to defense and the United States gained the momentum that would eventually carry it across the ocean toward victory. With the decisive moment secured, the aftermath of Midway would reshape the Pacific theater, affecting ships, personnel, and the broader war strategy. Next, aftermath and consequences. Understanding the impact on both sides and the rest of World War II. Reflection and analysis. Lessons in leadership. Midway offers enduring lessons in leadership. Admiral Nimitz exemplified calm, strategic foresight. He relied on intelligence, coordinated multiple units, and delegated operational control effectively. Vice Admiral Spruance demonstrated the importance of composure under pressure, making precise decisions with limited information. By contrast, Nagumo's hesitation highlights how indecision, even in skilled hands, can have catastrophic consequences. The power of intelligence. The battle underscores the decisive role of intelligence. Code-breaking by Station Hypo provided critical insight into Japanese plans. This early warning allowed the US to position forces advantageously and orchestrate a surprise counterattack. Analysts consider this one of the clearest examples in military history where information, rather than sheer numbers, determined the outcome of a major battle. Strategic planning and risk management. Midway demonstrates the value of risk assessment and adaptive planning. Japan's strategy relied on assumptions of American predictability and underestimation of US capabilities. The dispersal of Japanese forces, while intended to protect the operation, introduced vulnerabilities. Conversely, US planners concentrated their limited forces at decisive points, maximizing the effect of available assets. Technological and tactical insights. The battle highlighted the shift from battleships to carrier-centric warfare. Aircraft performance, deck operations, and coordination became decisive. US dive bombers, despite initial losses, achieved extraordinary accuracy at critical moments. Japan's Zero fighters, though superior in dogfights, could not compensate for vulnerabilities in fleet organization and timing. Human dimension and decision-making. The outcome also reflects human factors. Courage, training, and discipline shaped individual and group performance. Pilots pressed attacks against overwhelming odds, and crews maintained operational readiness under extreme stress. Leadership decisions, timely or delayed, had disproportionate effects, proving that battles are as much about human judgment as material strength. Long-term implications. Historically, Midway shifted the Pacific balance. Japan transitioned to defense while the US gained operational initiative. The battle reinforced the significance of air power, intelligence integration, and decisive leadership. These lessons influenced later campaigns, including Guadalcanal and the island-hopping strategy, shaping the broader conduct of the Pacific War. Closing reflection. Midway exemplifies the interplay between preparation, timing, and opportunity. It demonstrates that decisive victories can result from a combination of intelligence, leadership, tactical innovation, and human perseverance. For historians and strategists, the battle remains a benchmark for studying decision-making, under uncertainty and the transformation of naval warfare in the 20th century. With reflection complete, we now conclude the story with a cinematic ending, tying back to the opening question and leading into the next episode. Next, cinematic ending and teaser, wrapping up Midway and hinting at D-Day. Closing reflection. The Battle of Midway was more than a clash of ships and planes. It was a test of intelligence, timing, and human resolve. A handful of decisions made in critical minutes shifted the momentum of the Pacific War. 3 Japanese carriers lost, America's initiative secured, yet the battle's true significance lies in what it taught about strategy, leadership, and the unpredictable nature of conflict. Thank you for joining this journey into one of history's pivotal moments. We've seen how foresight, courage, and the power of information can change the course of a war. From code-breaking rooms to aircraft carriers slicing across the Pacific, Midway demonstrates that history often hinges on small, precise actions that ripple across time. If you found this story compelling, subscribe and comment below. Share your thoughts on the turning points that shaped history. Your engagement helps us continue exploring stories that illuminate the human experience and the lessons of past conflicts. Next, we sail from the Pacific to Europe to witness the Allies' daring invasion at Normandy. How did months of planning, deception, and courage culminate in D-Day? Join us for the next episode. D-Day, How the Allies Invaded Normandy.